Okay, to begin to make our fan, I've taped down a piece of paper to use as my pattern for the fabric. And I'll start by opening up the fan's backing or the staves, and I'm going to tape these down just so that it'll stay in place while I'm getting the rest of them equally distributed. I'm just going to start by doing this by eye, and then I'll check it with a little measuring ruler to make sure I've got them in place, and then I'll use some more of my tape to hold them in place. I'm using some blue painter's tape because I had it on hand and it's easy to remove. It's important to double check that your staves are in order, that you don't get them mixed up, because the bottom one is the lowest and the top one is the top. The next one is up higher than the one before. Now that I've got them approximately where they need to be, I'm going to use this little ruler, and I use it when I'm sewing, but any ruler will work. And it turns out that these, if they're about 2 1/4 inches apart, that will make your fan nice and even. You don't want to have one 1.5 inches apart and the next one 2 inches apart, because you will end up with the fan not folding as nicely as you would like it to fold. But they don't have to be perfect. There is an even number, so you won't have one in the center. And you'll find that if you just take a good look, you'll be pretty close just eyeing it. Okay, so we have those all about 2 1/4 inches apart. I'm going to take this painter's tape and just simply press it down, trying not to move any of the staves. And once this tape is on top, then I can push it down just a little bit more to hold them in place. And you might want to add even a couple more pieces of tape just to be sure, because they will easily move without the tape holding them together. So the next part of making the pattern is to just use a pen or a pencil or marker and draw a line very close to the end of the staves. And this will be your half circle, and this will be the pattern to cut your fabric. And you can see that if I hadn't had those taped together, they would easily have moved apart. Also, having them taped to my pattern paper keeps the whole thing from moving, and that's critical as well. I'm going to mark the center, and then I'm also going to mark from where the wide part ends on each of the outer staves, and then in between there, because we'll cut that inner semicircle out to make the fan operable. And there we have our pattern marked. Then you can lift the tape off and remove the fan staves and set that aside and cut out your pattern. What I find makes it more accurate is if you will take that center point that you cut and fold along that center point. And I know that this is straight because I had a straight edge for that paper. So I'm just going to use my regular scissors and cutting out and making this a nice smooth line. And by folding it in half, we've made it symmetrical. And we're not planning any extra to turn under. But if you have a sewing machine, or you'd like to stitch it by hand, you could add 1/4 inch on each side and press that under and then stitch it before gluing the fabric to your fan. That would also be the time that you would want to add ribbon, for instance, at the edge for a trim. So here's our pattern for our fabric. I've already ironed the fabric since all of these squares have creases. You'll want to iron first. Lay that right down along the edge, and I'm using a cutting mat here so I can check to make sure I have a straight edge, and lay that fabric down close to the edge. There'll be a slight angle. Using pins, or if you don't have pins, you can use tape as well. You can always tape a pattern to fabric. Pins sometimes make it a little easier to work with, and these long pins are especially easy to use. If you do a lot of fabric cutting, a cutting mat is a terrific thing to have, and you can use a roller cutter as well rather than scissors. I'm using scissors that I keep just for fabric to cut this pattern. I never cut paper with these. Keeps them sharp much, much longer. And they're a great investment for maybe $10 or $12 if you're doing any fabric cutting. Even if you want to cut off the legs of a pair of pants, something like that, it's good to have fabric shears. And we'll cut out this inside half circle. And the tiny strips just to keep the angle of the staves matching the fabric. And here's our fabric ready to go on the fan. So carefully pick up your fan staves, turn it over so the tape is on the bottom, and we're using glue that specifically says on the label that it can be used for fabric. I'm using Jewel-It, and we'll start at one end, and this should be the one that is the lowest or closest to your table surface. Carefully lay that end of your fabric onto the beginning stave. Match your edges. Take your time with it. And then just kind of lay that back. And we're going to glue one at a time going around. Don't put the glue on all of them at once. You'll find it'll be very hard to keep it smooth. All of your fabric glues should dry clear. It may show through while it's wet, but once it's dry, it won't. So we've got 3 ready, and we're just going to gently lay one down at a time. Barely press on it. Just make contact. Check to see that it's staying lined up, and then go on. You can see these staves are very thin, narrow, so it only takes just a bead of glue on each one. We did try this with hot glue, but it left sort of a large ridge and made folding the fan very difficult after the glue was set. When you get to the second to the last stave, you glue that one just as you have all the others, but then there's a change. And here is where the stave will go on top of the fabric. So tuck your fabric under and then put glue either right on the edge of the fabric is going to work best, because if you try to turn the whole thing over, your other glue is not set. And it's easy to have things move around. So you'll want to put the glue on top of the fabric, then put the stave in place, gently lifting up on that fabric and getting it lined up in position. Now, it looks like I have a little extra. I'll trim that off when all the glue has dried. I'm going to use Fray Check. If you're concerned about the cut edges of your fabric fraying, this is a great product that you can pick up where sewing supplies are sold, and you'll just run a small amount around the outside cut edge and the inside cut edge, and it will prevent the fabric from fraying over time. It dries clear, completely unnoticeable. And now your fan is ready to dry for a few hours, and you'll be ready to take off the tape and fold it. So this is a fan that we made previously, and I'm removing the tape from the staves because it's completely dried. And we're going to turn it over, and I'll show you how to fold it. Starting here, take the very next one and bring it over, and then the next, and continue around the fan, checking for wrinkles as you fold the first time especially. Tucking that fabric in to make the folds. And then as you can see, we had glued the fabric to underneath, and that gives us our finished outside with the staves on the outside. You'll want to pinch this together and let it sit, and always store it folded. And as you do that, you'll find that every time you open it, it has already begun to make its own folds, and it will get easier and easier to open and close the fan.